The storm howled like a beast unchained, its gusts clawing at the windows of Beacon Haven, a small harbor cafe that stood defiant against the tempest's rage. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee and courage, a sanctuary where the world's chaos paused at the threshold. Evelyn Harper sat alone, her wheelchair a sleek, matte black extension of her will, its quiet hum a steady heartbeat beneath her. On the table, a single cupcake bore a lone candle, its flame flickering like a star refusing to surrender to the night. It was her birthday, a day she'd once celebrated with abandon, now a quiet ritual marked by solitude and stubborn hope. "Don't move!" A small voice cut through the storm's roar, steady as a lifeguard's command. "You're about to lose your birthday." A boy in a yellow raincoat, no older than 6, stood with fierce determination, his eyes locked on the cupcake as it skidded across the table, teetering on the edge. The wind slammed the cafe door, rattling the glass, and the lights flickered, casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Ethan lunged, his small hands catching the plate with the precision of a surgeon, the candle's flame sputtering but holding fast. Behind him a man, broad-shouldered, hair damp from the downpour, jacket dripping rivers onto the floor, placed a steadying hand on the boy's shoulder. "Ethan," he said, his voice a low warning, softened by a smile that carried the warmth of a hearth. "Ask before you rescue a stranger's cake." Ethan turned to Evelyn, his 6-year-old gravity anchoring the moment. "May I save your birthday?" Evelyn's breath caught, her heart stumbling over the unexpected kindness. Her voice, when it returned, felt foreign, fragile as sea glass. "Yes, please." With careful reverence, Ethan eased the plate back to safety, pressing the candle upright as if it were a sacred relic. He glanced at his father, seeking a nod of approval. The man, hands calloused from years of shaping wood, gave it, a quiet affirmation that spoke louder than words. "Thank you," Evelyn said, the words slipping out like a confession she hadn't meant to voice. Her fingers tightened on the armrests of her chair, the hum beneath her a reminder of battles fought and won. "Storm's showing off today," the man said, his eyes flicking to the swaying Beacon Haven sign outside, battling the wind's fury. "You okay?" "I'm fine," Evelyn replied, the response automatic, a shield she'd worn too long. The cafe's metal footrest shivered with each gust that forced the door open, letting in the storm's cold breath. Ethan, undeterred, climbed onto the chair opposite her, chin propped on his fists, his gaze fixed on the candle's stubborn glow. "Do you make a wish?" he asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and solemnity. Evelyn hesitated, her heart a tide pool stirred by memory. "Sometimes," she said softly, "sometimes it's safer not to." Ethan frowned as if her words were a riddle he'd unravel later, his young mind already turning the puzzle over. The man set his sodden jacket over the chair's back, wringing water from his hair with fingers that knew hard work. He extended a hand, his grip warm and unpretentious, the kind that didn't need to prove strength. "Liam," he said, "this is my son, Ethan. And you are?" "Evelyn." Her hand disappeared in his, the contact grounding her like an anchor in a churning sea. "Do you two make a habit of dramatic entrances?" she asked, a spark of humor breaking through her guarded tone. "Only on Tuesdays," Ethan quipped, his eyes bright with mischief. "And any day with thunder." Liam tilted his head toward the window, where rain lashed the glass like a painter's furious strokes. "Power might cut. Mind if we share your table till it calms? We'll be out of your hair." "It's your storm," Evelyn said, gesturing to the empty chairs with a wry smile. "It's winning." The cafe had emptied as the sky darkened, its usual hum replaced by the storm's relentless argument with the town. Behind the counter, Clara Benson, silver-streaked hair in a messy bun, sleeves rolled to her elbows, watched them with the quiet wisdom of someone who'd fed souls through every season. Her eyes held no pity, only recognition, as if she saw Evelyn not as a solitary figure, but as a story still unfolding. Liam slid into the seat beside Ethan, his movements deliberate, unassuming. If he noticed Evelyn's chair, its sleek design built for speed and independence, he gave no sign, only took a napkin to wipe the rain that had splashed onto the table. "Keeping the candle?" he asked, his voice low, like he was speaking to the wood he shaped. "It's stubborn," Evelyn said, her gaze softening. Stubborn candles make the best wishes. Ethan leaned closer, his whisper conspiratorial. You can tell me your wish. I don't count. Then it wouldn't work, Evelyn whispered back, a smile tugging at her lips. Ethan nodded sagely, accepting her logic as if it were law. The sky cracked open, rain falling in slantwise sheets. Clara appeared with 3 steaming mugs, the aroma of coffee curling into the cold air like a promise. House policy, she said, her voice a warm current. Storm coffee's free if you're by the windows. Risk pay. Generous, Liam said, his eyes crinkling with appreciation. Practical, Clara countered, her smile sharp but kind. Keeps folks from running into traffic. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the mug, the heat seeping into her palms like courage distilled. She caught Clara's eye, and there it was, a flicker of recognition, not of pity, but of a woman who'd seen her by this window, year after year, carrying her solitude like a badge. Clara's nod was a silent vow. No pity served here. So, Liam said, his tone easy, unintrusive. What's a person do on a birthday in a storm? Evelyn blew on her coffee, the steam rising like a fleeting prayer. Apparently, she hires a small rescue team. Ethan sat taller, his chest puffed with pride. We work for tips, cake slices only. Noted, Evelyn said, her gaze shifting to Liam. You from here? Close enough, he replied, his voice carrying the weight of a life built by hand. Workshop's 15 minutes up the road. We build things. Tables, cribs, the occasional boat shelf when I'm feeling fancy. Clara's counter, Ethan added, pointing to the polished wood behind them. Dad fixed it when the corner stopped being brave. Evelyn's eyes traced the counter's edge, the grain flowing like a river, the corner seamless as if it had never known fear. You made that, Liam shrugged, a craftsman's humility in the gesture. I listened to the wood till it told me what it wanted. That's a line, Evelyn said, surprised by the warmth in her own voice, a pleasure she hadn't felt in too long. It's also true, Liam said, his eyes holding a maker's patience, the kind that sees the shape hidden in the rough. Do you have a line? Ethan asked, leaning forward, his curiosity a spark in the dim light. Like, something you say that makes people go, whoa, and think about it all day. Dad's got a bunch. I'm collecting them. Evelyn paused, her fingers tracing the mug's rim. She hadn't collected anything lately except reasons to guard her heart. I used to, she said finally, her voice soft with memory. I used to say, don't fight the water. Learn how it holds you. Ethan's eyebrows shot up, his face alight with awe. That's good, he said solemnly. That's whoa. Liam watched her, his interest gentle, unforced. Swimmer? Was, Evelyn said, and blew out the candle before the storm could claim it. The thin smoke curled upward, a private prayer rising from the ashes of her past. Silence settled over the table. Not heavy, not awkward, but the kind that lets truth catch its breath. She owed these strangers nothing, yet their presence felt like a gift she hadn't asked for. It's hard to celebrate alone, Liam said quietly, as if he'd plucked her thought from the air and laid it on the table. No judgment, only understanding. Evelyn's lips curved, almost a smile. Is that another one of your lines? It's a fact, he said, his voice steady as a well-placed nail. Facts are friendly. Lightning stitched the sky, the café dimming as the lights flickered, then steadied. Clara, undaunted, flipped a breaker in the back with the confidence of a ship's captain steering through a squall. Ethan raised a hand, a student eager with a question. Can we sing? He asked Clara, who raised a brow that said, in my café, even goldfish can sing. Just keep it soft. Softly, Ethan promised, turning to Evelyn with the seriousness of a choir boy. I might be a little creative. Creatives encouraged, Clara called from the counter, her voice a beacon of its own. Ethan cleared his throat, his small voice launching into a melody as unpredictable as the storm. Liam's baritone joined, steadying the tune like a keel in rough waters. It wasn't a performance, it was an offering, raw and off-key, a gift from a boy and his father to a woman they'd only just met. Evelyn felt an ache bloom behind her ribs, a quiet unfolding she didn't know how to name. She did nothing but let it grow. Make a second wish, Ethan whispered when the song ended, his eyes bright with hope. For backup. Greedy, Evelyn teased, but her voice trembled, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. The door slammed open again, admitting a man in a soaked baseball cap, shaking himself like a wet dog and barking orders into a phone. Clara's sharp glance silenced him, and he mouthed a sheepish sorry before retreating to a far table. The world rushed back, the clatter of cups, the hiss of the espresso machine, the storm's argument with the town. Liam held out a fork, his smile gentle but mischievous. Permission to commit cupcake? Evelyn laughed, a sound that startled her with its lightness, a melody she hadn't heard in years. Permission granted. They ate, the cupcakes shared in quiet bites, their conversations circling safe topics. Local high school teams, the town's tempestuous love affair with the sea. Ethan, with the gravitas of a scholar, explained his dinosaur hierarchy, each fact delivered with unwavering conviction. Liam listened to both with equal respect, his attention a steady current that made Evelyn feel seen, not studied. Your turn, she said when Ethan paused to breathe, her voice teasing but curious. Ethan glanced at Liam, a silent exchange passing between them, a conversation carried in a heartbeat. Liam's mouth lifted at one corner, a smile that held both sorrow and strength. Someone we love, he said softly. Every year we come here and tell a story about her. Sounds like a good tradition, Evelyn said, her voice catching on the weight of it. It is, Liam said. Traditions are how we carry people without dropping them. Another line, another truth. Evelyn tucked it away, a treasure she hadn't meant to find. Outside, a siren wailed and faded, the storm rearranging the clouds like a painter rethinking a canvas. Clara slid a small plate onto the table. 2 sugar cookies shaped like boats, their icing scalloped like waves. On the house, she said, her eyes soft on Evelyn. For navigating. Evelyn lifted one, studying the delicate edges. What if I'm not very good at it? She asked, the question heavier than cookies, heavier than the storm. Then you do what boats do, Clara said, her voice steady as the tide. You keep pointing your bow toward home, even if you zigzag to get there. Ethan bit into his cookie, his expression stern with purpose. I zigzag all the time, he said proudly. Dad says it's called course correction. It's not a mistake, it's science. Your dad has a line for everything, Evelyn said, her smile warmer now, unguarded. Only the important parts, Liam replied, a hint of self-mockery in his tone, like a man who knew his words were tools, not weapons. The wind softened, the rain easing into a tentative truce. Patrons checked their phones, some standing to peer out, deciding the storm had spent enough of its fury for them to brave the streets. Liam glanced at the door, then back at Evelyn. We can walk you to your car, he offered, his tone careful, not presuming. I don't have one today, Evelyn said, the words carrying more than she intended. I needed the walk. Liam nodded, hearing what she didn't say, understanding the weight of choosing a path on your own terms. Then we'll sit, he said, until the sidewalk stopped trying to swim. Ethan pointed at the cupcake's remains, his eyes gleaming with purpose. You didn't tell us your wish. I told you, Evelyn said, her voice soft but firm. It won't work if I do. Maybe it already did, Ethan said, his words simple, profound, a child's certainty cutting through the storm's noise. Sometimes wishes sneak in before you say them out loud. Maybe it already did, Ethan said, his voice a soft beacon in the storm's fading roar, his 6-year-old wisdom cutting through the cafe's hum like a lighthouse through fog. Sometimes wishes sneak in before you say them out loud. Liam let out a breath, a half laugh that carried the weight of a father's pride and wonder. He's 6, he said, his eyes crinkling with warmth as they met Evelyn's. But he thinks he's 80. I like 80, Ethan declared, his small hands tapping the table like a drum roll of conviction. 80-year-olds say what they mean. Evelyn swallowed, a lump rising in her throat, her heart stirred by the boy's unfiltered truth. I like 82, she said, her voice softer than the rain now whispering against the windows of Beacon Haven. The storm outside had softened to a gentle murmur, the sky lightening by a hesitant inch, as if testing its own resolve. Somewhere deep in the cafe, a heater thumped to life, a reassuring pulse that said the world hadn't stopped turning. Life, in its quiet persistence, was its own kind of miracle. Liam glanced at his watch, its face worn but steady, and stood to refill their water glasses. Evelyn watched his hands, scarred, nicked, beautiful in the way of things shaped by purpose. Hands that had built tables and mended broken corners. Hands that engineered second chances. He returned, the glasses clinking softly, and Evelyn surprised herself, her voice breaking the silence like a crack in a dam. "Liam," she said, then paused. She was a fortress, moat and drawbridge raised, yet something in his steady presence made her want to lower the gate. He waited patient as maple, his eyes holding no demand, only an invitation to speak. "Thank you," she said finally, the words raw, as if she were thanking a stranger who didn't feel like one. Liam nodded once, a craftsman's nod, simple and sure. "You didn't feel like a stranger." Ethan tapped the table twice, an excited rhythm. "Dad says some people are familiar the first time you meet them," he announced, his voice bright with discovery. "Like a song you forgot you knew." Evelyn's smile wobbled, a fragile thing caught between memory and hope. "Your dad says a lot of good things." "Not all at once," Liam said, a wry grin softening the edges of his words, or he'd run out. Or. The storm grumbled one last time, a petulant farewell, and the sky brightened, casting tentative light through the cafe's fogged windows. Chairs scraped as patrons donned coats, the room stirring back to ordinary life. "Looks like our window's closing," Liam said, his tone gentle but practical. "We should let Clara reset before the crowd sneaks back in." Clara snorted from behind the counter, her silver-streaked bun catching the light. "You three can take root," she said, her voice warm but firm, her eyes sliding to the door where a figure paused. A man in a sleek coat, umbrella in hand, his jaw set with impatience. He scanned the room dismissive and moved on, blind to Evelyn's presence. Liam followed her gaze, his brow furrowing slightly. "Friend?" "Something like that," Evelyn said, her voice thinning, a shadow of the outside world creeping back to claim her. Liam didn't pry, only slid the plate toward Ethan. "One more bite for the road." Ethan obeyed with cheerful gusto, then dug into his pocket, producing a crooked dinosaur sticker, its edges worn but proud. He placed it before Evelyn with the gravity of a knight bestowing a token. "For luck," he said. "Luck likes to be told where to go." "I'll keep that in mind," Evelyn said, tucking the sticker into her wallet as if it were a treasure worth guarding. They stood, the power holding steady, the bell over the door chiming as another patron slipped out into the cold. Liam pulled on his jacket, then hesitated, his words casual but deliberate, like a porch light left on for a weary traveler. "We're usually here on Tuesdays, storm or no storm." Evelyn's hand lingered over the cupcake plate, then returned to the wheel of her chair. "Noted," she said, her voice steady, a promise to herself as much as to them. "See you, Evelyn," Ethan chirped, his smile a burst of sunlight. "See you, Ethan," she replied, her heart swelling. "Thank you for saving my birthday." Outside, the rain had tapered to a fine mist. The world washed clean. Liam held the door for Ethan, then glanced back. For a heartbeat, their eyes met. His, a quiet harbor of locked rooms and cracked windows. Hers, a sea learning to trust its own tides. The bell chimed once more, the door swinging shut, leaving Evelyn alone with the blackened wick of the candle, a silent curl of hope. Clara leaned on the counter, her gaze gentle but unflinching. "You going to sit here waiting for the next storm?" she asked, her voice a soft challenge, not indulgent but kind. "Or are you going to make your own weather?" Evelyn brushed a crumb from the plate, her fingers trembling with possibility. "Maybe," she said, the word a spark in her chest. "Maybe I'll learn to carry an umbrella." "Good start," Clara said, her smile a quiet vow. "Umbrellas are just portable courage." Evelyn turned her chair toward the door, the motors humming like a steady heartbeat. She glanced at the counter's mended corner, where Liam's hands had coaxed bravery from broken wood. Her fingertips brushed it, and it felt like a promise, a tangible, human kind of promise. The storm wasn't just weather anymore. It was a shared space, a room where hearts met and held fast. Outside, Bayview Town's Main Street hissed under the fading rain, headlights blurring into streaks of gold, gulls wheeling low like fragments of a torn sky. Inside Beacon Haven, the glass fogged with breath and coffee steam, the air alive with the soft voices of people huddled in islands around their tables, speaking quieter than the thunder's claim. Evelyn lingered, the extinguished candle tucked into a napkin like a secret she wasn't ready to release. Liam and Ethan returned, bearing a tray Clara had pressed on them, 2 bowls of steaming soup, a plate of soda crackers stacked like small, practical promises. "Consider this a storm truce," Liam said, setting a bowl before her, his voice warm as the broth. "No one leaves hungry." Evelyn's smile flickered, a candle reigniting. "Is that a rule from the woodshop?" "It's a rule from the kitchen table," Liam said, his eyes steady, grounding. "Best government I've ever known." Ethan dunked a cracker with the precision of a scientist at work. "Dad says soup is a hug you can eat," Clara called from the counter, her voice cutting through without looking up. "Your dad has more proverbs than an old librarian." She caught herself, rolling her eyes skyward. "I mean, a librarian." Liam raised his spoon like a toast, his grin wry. "To librarians, and to people who look at storms and decide to feed them." They ate, the quiet between them a good kind, the kind that didn't rush you out of your own story. On the opposite wall, a black and white photograph of Beacon Haven from the 1970s watched with grainy patience. Clara's mother on the stoop, apron tied, hair scarfed, a line of fishermen waiting for pie. Ethan followed Evelyn's gaze. "That's Miss Clara when she was a kid," he declared with authority. Clara laughed from the register. "That's my mama," she corrected, her voice rich with memory. "She could tell me to stop sulking in 3 languages with one look." "She taught you the free in a storm rule?" Liam asked, his tone light but curious. "She taught me the people come first rule," Clara said, her eyes warm. "The storm just gives me an excuse." Evelyn let her spoon rest, her heart stirred by the ease of being included, not as a guest but as part of the table's choreography. She studied Liam's hands as he warmed them around his bowl, knuckles scuffed, a thin scar angling across his thumb, hands that measured twice and believed in second chances. "What kind of wood do you like best?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. The question a window cracked open. "Whatever tells the truth," Liam said, his voice steady as a well-placed beam. "Cherry's honest, maple's patient, oak's a stubborn old man who softens when you listen." "Is there wood that lies?" Evelyn tilted her head, her curiosity a tide pulling her forward. "Only when you pretend it's something it isn't," Liam said. "But that's not a wood problem. That's a people problem." Ethan nodded, sage beyond his years. "We don't pretend at our house," he told Evelyn. "Dad says pretending is for costumes, not feelings." "Your dad says a lot of things worth writing down," Evelyn said, her voice soft with admiration. Liam shrugged, deflecting the compliment. "Talking's cheaper than showing. I let the work do the heavy lifting." The words landed softly, deeply, finding a place in Evelyn's chest where truth usually slipped through. The bell over the door clanged twice, admitting a gust and a couple whispering about whether storms were omens. "It counts as wet," Clara advised, handing over napkins as the lights flickered, phones glowing with ghostly blue light. "Tell me your Tuesday story," Evelyn said to Ethan, leaning forward, her voice eager to hold on to the moment. Ethan's face lit up, his fingers counting memories. "We come here and say one thing we remember about my mom," he said. "Like, her pancakes were always circles, never ovals. And she thought my middle name should be Brave. But Dad said that's like homework for life." Liam grinned, the memory softening his edges. "We compromised with James. Brave is earned, not issued." Evelyn's throat tightened, and she sipped her soup to cover it. "Do you remember her?" she asked Ethan gently. "I remember the stories," he said, his voice free of sadness, bright with certainty. "Stories are like stepping stones so you don't fall in the river." "That's exactly right," Evelyn said, her palm pressing the tabletop, feeling the faint pulse of rain on glass, a living drumbeat. I used to swim, she added, the words a quiet offering, laid out like bread, broken for sharing. Liam looked at her, his gaze open, not prying. What kind of swimmer? The kind who learned to breathe on the third stroke and count tiles when the ceiling didn't make sense, she said, her eyes tracing the wood grain. The kind who thought water was the only thing that loved her back. Ethan whispered, "That's a good line," and reached for a cracker. Liam's voice was steady, a lifeline. The water still loves you. It's patient, like maple. Evelyn's laugh was quick, surprised, a spark in the dim. You can't talk to water like you talk to wood. You can, Liam said, his words hanging like a rope you could trust, if you've learned to listen. A sharp crack split the sky, the lights blinking out. Gas rippled through the cafe, then hushed. Clara's voice floated from the back, calm as a captain. Don't panic, darlings. Beacon Haven sails better in the dark than most places do in the sun. Liam's hand moved, unhurried, and a small flashlight winked on from his pocket, its beam a gentle glow. He set it upright, the light pooling over their bowls, a soft tent against the storm. Ethan leaned into the glow, delighted. Dad carries everything. He says pockets are for preparedness, not crumbs. I say pockets are for money, Clara muttered, bumping a drawer. Someone remind me to put good batteries on the list. Evelyn watched the light transform the storm into a distant player, the cafe feeling like a backyard campout. Safe, conspiratorial, a quiet rebellion against chaos. Liam angled the beam away from her eyes, a small courtesy that felt like care. You okay? He asked, his voice carrying the weight of the dark, the noise, the way a blackout could tip you into uncharted waters. I'm okay, Evelyn said and meant it, her chair humming softly beneath her like a loyal companion. She checked the joystick, a habit, the battery reading full. Everything worked. Sometimes the lights go out, Ethan said, his tone confidential, wise. It's fine. We still know where the chairs are. Evelyn laughed, the sound a warm defiance. Comfort should be unreasonable, Liam said, his voice low, certain. Otherwise, it's just furniture. The power flickered back, hesitant as a child peeking around a corner, then held. Conversation rustled through the room, a collective exhale. Clara emerged triumphant, a candle on a saucer in her hand. In case electricity gets bored again, she said, setting it near the flashlight, redundancy is next to good planning. Evelyn looked at the small flame, feeling a spark of permission ignite within her. Clara's voice softened, her name a gentle anchor. Evelyn, you were here years ago with your mom. Same spot, rain coming sideways. Evelyn's breath caught, a small O escaping her lips. The photograph on the wall, Clara's mother, aproned, serving fishermen, flashed in her mind. You have a good memory, she said. I have a long counter, Clara replied, her smile a keeper of moments. It catches people's stories before they slip off the edge. Evelyn swallowed, her mother's voice echoing. Lemon and sea salt saying, some rooms are built to keep you dry. Some are built to keep you. Liam let the silence live, his presence a steady plank across the river of her thoughts. Ethan's small hands tapped a rhythm with his spoon, a quiet percussion that seemed to chase the storm's fading echo. Then, sensing a shift in the air, something unspoken but deeply felt, he set the spoon down, folding his hands with the solemnity of a child who understood more than he could name. The silence at their table in Beacon Haven was a living thing, warm and unhurried, a space where truth could gather without fear of being swept away. Liam leaned forward, his voice low, steady as the grain of well-worked wood. Ever need a quiet? He asked Evelyn, his eyes searching hers with gentle intent. My shop's good at it. Wood doesn't like yelling. Clara, wiping the counter nearby, clucked softly, her silver-streaked bun catching the cafe's soft light. Wood forgives, same as people, she said, her voice a warm current, but it prefers gentle. Evelyn turned the candle in her hands, its soft heat pulsing against her fingertips like a heartbeat. The gesture was small, but it felt like turning a key in a long-locked door. Maybe I'll see your shop, she heard herself say, the words bold, unexpected, a crack in the fortress she'd built around her heart. If you're not overwhelmed with saving furniture in distress. Liam's smile was no salesman's pitch. It was true, raw as freshly cut cedar. We can always save one more corner that's forgotten how to be brave. The thunder muttered a reluctant retreat, the rain softening into steady, delicate lines, as if the storm had finally tired of its tantrum. Patrons stood, shaking out umbrellas, their voices blending into a communal verdict. It's letting up. Ethan slid off his chair, kinetic as a spark, his eyes bright with purpose. We gotta go before the puddles turn into oceans, he announced, his voice a clarion call. I promised my socks I wouldn't betray them. Liam stood, shrugging into his jacket, the fabric still damp from the storm's embrace. He clicked off the flashlight, its beam no longer needed, and hesitated, his words soft as a porch light left on for a weary traveler. We'll be around on Tuesday, he said, but you don't need Tuesday. Evelyn tucked the napkin-wrapped candle into her coat pocket, its warmth a quiet vow against her palm. Maybe I'll try Monday, she said, her voice daring, a spark of courage igniting within her. Bold, Liam said, amusement dancing in his eyes. Mondays don't see many heroes. Then they won't see me coming, she replied, her smile a quiet defiance. Ethan gave a solemn thumbs up, his face alight with approval. Sneaky hero, he said, as if bestowing a title. At the door, Liam paused, hand on the handle, and turned back, his voice gentle as the rain's last whisper. One more thing, he said. If the world tries to rush you, don't let it. The right stuff is built on patient time. Evelyn's voice faltered, so she nodded, the weight of his words settling like a well-placed plank. Noted, she managed. I'll try to be... Maple, Liam said, his smile warm, certain. Maple suits you. The bell chimed, the cold leaning in as Liam and Ethan stepped into the rinsed streets of Bayview Town. Evelyn watched the door swing shut, the last raindrop trembling on the awning like a final note of applause. Their absence was a tangible thing, a weight lifted after years of carrying it, leaving her heart both lighter and heavier with possibility. Clara collected the empty bowls, her movements brisk but kind, and placed a business card on the table without comment, plain white, embossed with a small tree and the words Carver & Son Woodworks. On the back, in Liam's unapologetic scrawl, Tuesday always, but any day is fine. Evelyn turned the card with her thumb, the street outside gleaming like a new idea under the clearing sky. You gonna wait for next Tuesday? Clara asked, rinsing bowls, her voice casual but piercing, as if it were any ordinary afternoon. Evelyn slid the card into her wallet beside Ethan's dinosaur sticker, its crooked edges a small, fierce promise. I might try a different day, she said slowly, the words a vow to herself. Maybe the day that starts with now. Clara's smile found the window first, then Evelyn, bright as the harbor's first light. Best one, she said. Doesn't require reservations. As Evelyn rolled toward the door, her chair's motor purred like a steadfast vow. The sidewalks had ceased their struggle against the rain, and she lifted her face to the damp air, not to measure the weather, but to memorize the feeling of being held by a room when the sky forgot how. Across the street, Crescent Bay sipped the last of the rain, a gull's cry ringing out like laughter. Evelyn touched the pocket where the candle rested, its warmth a quiet pulse, and thought, if water can carry a ship, maybe it can carry a name I haven't yet learned to say aloud. She didn't speak it, letting the thought drift beside her as she rolled toward home, a small boat keeping pace in the tide of her heart. The next morning, Evelyn awoke before Bayview Town stirred, her penthouse bathed in pale blue light, every surface softened like a memory. The rain had stopped in the night, but the windows bore its fingerprints, delicate and fleeting. She sat at the kitchen island, a mug of tea gone lukewarm, staring at the condensation as if it might answer a question she hadn't dared to ask. Her father's voice crackled through the intercom, sharp and impersonal. Evelyn, I've moved the board call to 9. We'll do a quick check-in before then. It wasn't a request, but a command dressed in civility. Evelyn pressed the button, her voice steady but edged with defiance. It's not a good morning for a check-in, Dad. It's 10 minutes, Edward Langley said, as if time were a currency he could afford to spend on her behalf. Then you can have the rest of the day for whatever you're doing lately. The words scraped, a reminder of the distance between them. We'll see, she murmured, but the channel had already gone silent. She turned her chair toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, where crescent bays shimmered like hammered silver. Gulls screamed over scraps, fishing boats crawling home, and for a moment, Evelyn imagined the water on her skin. Cold, honest, uncomplicated. Then, unbidden, the memory surged. The starter's pistol cracking, her body slicing through the water, counting tiles with each stroke, breathing on the third. The turn a perfect tumble into the wall. The world had narrowed to rhythm, muscle, heartbeat. She was ahead. She knew it, until the scream of tires tore through, her body weightless for a single endless second. The scent of burnt rubber, then darkness, her name echoing from a place she couldn't reach. She blinked, the window clearing, the present rushing back. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. She almost ignored it, but Ethan's voice echoed in her mind. Maybe the wish already worked. She opened the message, a photo of Beacon Haven's counter, bathed in afternoon sun, and beneath it, in tidy block letters, "We fixed the squeaky hinge. Tuesday safe again." No signature, but none was needed. She knew. Miles away in Carver & Son Woodworks, Liam bent over a cedar plank, the air thick with sawdust and the sharp, clean bite of cut wood. Light poured through the roll-up door, catching motes like slow-falling snow. Ethan sat cross-legged on the workbench, sketching a stegosaurus in rain boots, his pencil scratching with purpose. "Dad," he said, not looking up, "are we going to see her again?" Liam brushed shavings from the board, his hands steady but his heart heavy with hope. "Maybe," he said. "That's up to her." "She smiled," Ethan said, his voice certain. "Different. Not the I'm being polite smile. The real one." Liam's mouth curved, just enough to count. "Real ones are rare." Ethan leaned closer to his drawing, his brow furrowed with determination. "We should help her keep it." Liam didn't answer right away, the plane whispering against the cedar's edge. "Sometimes, kiddo, the best help is letting people walk in on their own." "She doesn't walk," Ethan said plainly, his innocence a blade that cut without malice. Liam looked up, caught by the weight of it, his heart aching for the truth his son saw so clearly. "Then maybe the best help is making sure the road's clear." That Saturday the road cleared. Evelyn rolled through the open doors of Carver & Son Woodworks, the scent of pine and varnish wrapping her like a long-awaited embrace. Ethan spotted her first, his mismatched rain boots pounding the floor as he ran to her. "You came!" he cried, holding out a sheet of paper. "I made this for you. It's us at the cafe, but the candle's a rocket ship." Evelyn studied the crooked rocket, its smoke trail a burst of confetti, and her heart swelled. "I love it," she said. "That's a much better candle." Liam emerged from behind a half-built table, wiping his hands on a rag, his smile warm with surprise. "Didn't expect you on a Saturday. I wanted to see where corners remember how to be brave," Evelyn said, the corners of her own mouth daring a smile. "Come on, then," Liam said, leading her past workbenches cluttered with chisels and clamps, each surface a small nation of projects in progress. He tapped a rich, reddish slab. "This is cherry, stubborn, but it warms if you earn its trust." Evelyn ran her fingers along the grain, its texture a quiet truth. "Like people," she said. Liam's eyes flickered toward her, steady and knowing. "Exactly like people." At the back he showed her an unfinished rocking chair, its cradle smooth and waiting. "Maple," he said. "Patient. Doesn't mind waiting to be what it's meant to be." Evelyn traced the armrest curve, her touch reverent. "It's steady." "Steady's underrated," Liam said. "Everybody wants spectacular until spectacular lets them down." She looked up at him, her heart a tide turning. "And you?" "I want honest," he said, shrugging. "Honest lasts longer." A stillness settled, not empty, but full, heavy with sawdust and unspoken words. Later, sitting on an upturned crate as Liam and Ethan worked, Evelyn found herself sharing a memory. Her first swim meet at 12, the terror of the starting block, until her coach's voice cut through. "Water doesn't judge the shape of you. It only mirrors the way you move." Ethan's brow furrowed, his eyes wide with wonder. "So you and the water were friends?" "We were," Evelyn said softly, her voice catching on the edge of memory. We still are, maybe. We just, don't visit as often. Liam glanced at her, his look quick but piercing, seeing the shape beneath her words. Friends wait, he said, his voice a quiet anchor. As Evelyn Harper rolled away from Carver and Son Woodworks, the scent of cedar and new beginnings lingered in her wake, a quiet promise etched in the air. Behind her, Liam Carver watched her go, his heart a workshop of its own, turning over thoughts of roads. Some you build, some you clear, and some you stand beside, patient as maple, until someone is ready to travel them. The rain had taken a day off, leaving Crescent Bay glittering under a pale winter sun, its surface a mirror for dreams not yet spoken. Evelyn found herself on a narrow side street in Bayview Town, one she'd never noticed before, where the air carried the sharp tang of salt and sawdust, a pairing that stirred a longing she hadn't known she'd buried. She'd been thinking of the workshop since her last visit, not as a place to pass through, but as a corner of her heart claimed without permission, its warmth a tide pulling her back. Outside the shop, Liam bent over a plank balanced on sawhorses, a pencil tucked behind his ear, his hands moving with the steady reverence of a man who listened to wood. Ethan sat on the curb, a box of chalk at his side mapping a crooked racetrack for toy cars, his small world alive with purpose. Both looked up as Evelyn approached, their faces breaking into smiles like sunlight through storm clouds. You came back, Ethan said, his voice bright with the certainty that this was the world's natural order. Seems like, Evelyn replied, her smile tentative but real, a spark of courage flickering in her chest. Liam straightened, brushing sawdust from his shirt, his eyes warm with surprise. I was just thinking about calling you. Why? Evelyn asked, her curiosity a quiet wave lapping at the shore. He gestured toward the open workshop door, where light spilled across the floor like an invitation. Thought you might want to see something unfinished. It's honest that way. Before the polish, before it pretends to be perfect. Evelyn tilted her head, intrigued. Why show me something unfinished? Because that's when it tells the truth, Liam said, his voice steady as a well-placed nail, his gaze holding hers with a craftsman's clarity. Inside, the workshop was warmer than she remembered, the afternoon light painting wide golden bars across the floor. Each workbench was a story in progress. Half-carved legs, stacks of sandpaper, jars of screws glinting like captured constellations. Liam stopped beside a tall maple frame, its lines strong but unrefined. This one's going to be a dining table, he said, for a family with too many kids. Evelyn ran her fingers along the edge, the grain a quiet river under her touch. It's smooth. Not yet, Liam said, his smile wry. Smooth's a finish. This is just patient. She smiled, the word resonating deep within her. Patience is good. Patience lasts. Liam watched her, his gaze hearing more than she said, a silent understanding passing between them. You know what I like about wood? It doesn't lie, he said gently. Press too hard, you see it. Cut wrong, it won't forget, but it'll let you try again. Evelyn looked at the grain, its honesty a mirror to her own guarded heart. People should be more like that. Some are, Liam said, his voice soft but certain. You just have to find them. They moved to the back, where a low bench held smaller projects. Ethan hammered nails into a scrap piece with fierce precision, his brow furrowed in concentration. This is going to be a shelf for your books, he announced, looking up at Evelyn. Dad says you probably read a lot, so I'm making it strong enough for heavy things. Evelyn's laugh was soft, warm, a sound that felt like home. That's thoughtful. It's engineering, Ethan corrected, his seriousness almost comical, his pride a beacon in the sawdust-filled air. Liam leaned on the bench, watching his son with a father's quiet awe. You'd be surprised how much of life is just making sure the shelves can hold what people give you. Evelyn met his eyes, a warmth stirring in her chest, uneasy but alive, like a tide turning toward shore. After a while, Liam wiped his hands and nodded toward the large sliding door at the back. Want to see the creek? Is that part of the tour? She asked, her tone teasing but curious. It's part of the shop, Liam said. We build with what we understand, and the water keeps me honest. They stepped outside, Liam walking, Evelyn rolling, into a small clearing where a wooden footbridge arched over a narrow stream. The water murmured against rocks, carrying the faint scent of pine from upstream, a quiet hymn to resilience. Liam rested his hands on the railing, his voice low, weighted with memory. When my wife died, I came here every night, no matter how late. The bridge didn't talk back, didn't promise it'd be okay. It just stayed. Sometimes that's enough. Evelyn's palms pressed against the worn grain, her heart echoing the bridge's quiet endurance. I think I've been waiting for someone to stay, she said softly, the words slipping out like a confession she hadn't planned. Liam glanced at her, his silence a space for her truth to breathe. Staying takes work, he said finally, but some things are worth the maintenance. On the way back, Evelyn paused at a half-finished cabinet, its edges raw but full of promise. What happens if you make a mistake? Liam picked up a chisel, running his thumb along its edge, his touch deliberate. Depends. Some mistakes you sand out, some you patch, and some you leave, because the piece wouldn't be itself without them. That's forgiving, Evelyn said, her voice catching on the word. That's realistic, Liam replied. Perfection's a lonely place. When it was time to leave, Liam walked her to the door, Ethan trailing behind. The boy shoved a small paper bag into her lap. Wood shavings, he said, his tone serious as a vow. They smell like the shop, so you don't forget to come back. Evelyn inhaled the scent, warm, resinous, a little wild, and smiled. I think I won't forget. Liam stood, one hand on the doorframe, his voice soft but steady. You don't have to wait for Tuesday. She met his eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them, the workshop humming with the unspoken space between the last cut and the first coat of finish. I know, she said, and rolled into the cooling air, the bag in her lap, the creak's echo in her ears. As the door swung shut, Liam watched her go, his heart a workbench where something new was taking shape. Not of wood, but of hope, fragile and strong as a well-built bridge. Across Bayview Town, Edward Langley's study on the 41st floor was a cathedral of quiet power, glass walls that tamed the city's skyline, books arranged like arguments already won, a walnut desk vast enough to command empires. Edward stood before the windows, jacket off, sleeves rolled, as if ready to wrestle the horizon into submission. Oliver Reed, his general counsel, set a thin folder on the desk, his movements precise. You asked for a discreet check, he said. I was discreet. Edward opened the folder with a surgeon's precision, his face unreadable. Inside were photos of Carver & Son Woodworks, bank statements dusted with red, a list of clients, local restaurants, a marina, a church with a pulpit shaped like a ship's bow. One page stopped him, a boy in rain boots grinning, a man's hand on his shoulder, both spattered with sawdust, looking at the camera not as if caught, but as if found. Liam Carver, Oliver said, his voice even. Widower, 6-year-old son. The shop has seasonal cash flow issues, nothing unusual for a small outfit, but he's leveraged. Edward's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. Leverage is another word for weak. In your world, Oliver replied, unflinching. In his, it's how you keep the lights on. Edward flipped a page. What about character? People like him, Oliver said simply. The marina owner called him a man you can hand your name to. The church treasurer said, if he says he'll show, he shows. Edward's gaze lingered on the photo, Ethan's hand buried in Liam's. What's he doing with my daughter? Talking, Oliver said. Building a shelf with the kid, drinking coffee, laughing. Edward's mouth thinned, a crack in his armor. She won't answer my dinners, my calls, my calendar requests, but she'll laugh with a carpenter. Oliver held his gaze steady as a keel. I think she's laughing with herself, sir. He just didn't get in the way. Edward's hand hovered over the folder, then withdrew. Draft a letter, he said, his voice cold as steel. From a neutral firm, inform their largest client that partnering with a shop under investigation for workplace safety irregularities would reflect poorly. Suggest they reconsider. Oliver didn't move, his silence a quiet rebellion. Under investigation by whom? Anyone who frightens them, Edward said, his tone calm but terrible, a storm brewing in his words. An email can be a storm if it's worded right. Oliver chose his words with care, each one measured. Walter, you're about to weaponize rumor. That's a tool that doesn't just hit one target. Edward sat, steepling his fingers like a man at prayer. We can rebuild a shop with cash, he said. We cannot rebuild a life if a predator breaks it. I'm protecting my daughter. Oliver paused, his voice soft but piercing. Or protecting yourself from what you can't fix. Edward's eyes were ice. Do your job, Oliver. Oliver nodded once, his face unreadable. I'll write the letter, he said, turning to go, then added quietly. I met Evelyn when she was 10. She offered me a lemon drop and said my tie made me look serious but kind. She doesn't need a moat. She needs a bridge. Good lawyers don't preach, Edward said, his voice sharp. Good fathers listen, Oliver replied, closing the door softly behind him. Across town, Liam was measuring twice, his hands steady as he faced Simon Holt, a chain store buyer with neat hair and a watch that shouted wealth. Simon paced the length of a counter Liam had mocked up in tape on the shop floor. We like your concept, he said. We're going authentic for our waterfront flagship. Instagram loves wood, makes people feel like they're buying humanity with their coffee. Liam grinned, his humor a quiet defiance. Wood has better manners than Instagram. Simon laughed, the sound expected but hollow. He snapped photos, his tone turning brisk. Timeline's aggressive. 4 weeks. Can you meet it? Liam glanced at the calendar above the drill press, its squares crowded with names, arrows, delivery windows. He thought of payroll, insurance, Ethan's winter boots that fit like a memory. We'll meet it, he said, his voice firm. We don't miss. Good, Simon said, extending a hand. Legal will send paperwork. Try not to bleed on it. They shook hands, and after Simon left, Liam leaned against the bench, exhaling a breath he'd held since the call came. He could see it, the grains flow, the lights curve at 4 in the afternoon, the way people would lean on the counter and share secrets, unaware that wood listens. Ethan barreled in from the back, clutching paint sticks like trophies. Did we win? We got a big job, Liam said, ruffling his son's hair. Might have to skip Wednesday pancakes for a while. Ethan pretended to swoon, his drama pure and unfiltered. We suffer for the art. Liam laughed, the sound a small victory. We eat on Saturday. At 3:17 p.m., an email pierced the quiet of Carver & Son Woodworks, its subject line a siren's wail. Due diligence concern. Immediate attention required. Liam Carver read it twice, then a third time, his jaw tightening as the words, clean, calculated, and cloaked in suggestion, sank in. Whispers of a safety complaint. Not official, of course, just prudent to pause. He knew this game. You didn't need to prove a crack to destabilize a foundation. You only needed to point and whisper, listen. By 4:02 p.m., Simon Holt, the chain store buyer, forwarded it with a corporate sigh woven into the text. We must hit pause while we clarify. You understand. By 4:07, 2 smaller clients called, their voices polite but edged with caution, asking to push their projects to spring, just to be prudent. By 4:30, the workshop was too quiet. Not the calm of contemplation, but the stillness of tools laid to rest. Ethan looked up from his dinosaurs, their crayon scales vivid against the sawdust-strewn floor. Bad news, Fog? He asked, his voice small but sharp. Corporate fog, Liam said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We'll wait for the wind to change. Ethan tilted his head, considering. Do we need bigger fans? Maybe just steadier hearts, Liam replied, his voice a measured hammer driving hope home. He sent an email to Simon, offering to walk the site, inviting their safety consultant to the shop, attaching OSHA receipts and photos, every scrap of truth he could muster. Then he called the smaller clients, his tone firm but not pleading, assuring them the counters would be the most reliable part of their buildings. He hung up, exhaled, and set the planer back on the bench, knowing rage and power tools were a volatile marriage, doomed to splinter. The bell over the shop door jingled, a fragile note in the heavy air. Liam hoped for Simon, hand extended in apology. Instead, Clara Benson stepped in, wind tugging at her scarf, a box tucked under her arm. "Cookies," she announced, her voice a warm defiance against the day's wait. "For the kind of day they don't fix but make a good start." Liam's smile broke through, weary but genuine. "You bring the Old Testament and the cookies." "Proverbs and sugar," Clara said, setting the box down with a flourish. "That's a balanced diet." Her eyes caught the shadow on his face. "Who pulled a cloud over your son?" "An email," Liam said, and told her, his voice steady but raw, omitting the ache that came with the pause. A hand rearranging his life without consent. Clara's mouth set, her gaze sharp as a blade. "Fog is a tactic," she said. "Cowards love fog." "Or fathers," Liam said before he could stop himself, the words slipping out like shavings from a plane. Clara's eyes softened, seeing the truth he didn't name. "So the storm has a name." "I don't know," Liam said, but he did. His carpenter's instinct sensing a warp months before it showed, not by magic but by muscle memory. "Doesn't matter. We'll hold the line." Ethan, mouthful of cookie, looked up. "Can fog be good if it makes you move slow?" "Slow saves lives," Clara said, her voice a steady tide. Liam kissed Ethan's head, the gesture a vow. "We're going to be okay," he said, meaning it because saying it was the first nail in the bridge they'd build through this. At dusk, Evelyn Harper sat in her mother's old reading chair, the city a constellation of lights below her penthouse. The intercom pinged, Edward Langley's voice cutting through, not asking but demanding. "1 minute, Evelyn." She rolled into his study, the hum of her chair a quiet rebellion against the cathedral of power. Dark paneled walls, shelves of first editions, a view that shrank people to specks. Edward didn't look up from his laptop until she stopped across from him, her presence a counter-argument his wealth couldn't silence. "You're late," he said, his tone clipped. "I didn't agree to the meeting," Evelyn replied, her voice sharp, unyielding. He closed the laptop gently, a gesture more menacing than a slam. "You are my responsibility," he said, "and you are behaving irresponsibly." Evelyn's laugh was small, cutting. "I had soup with a child, with a man who sees the cracks and aims for them," she said, nodding toward the folder on his desk. "You call him leveraged. You think he'll take what he can. That's not judgment. That's fear." Edward stood, his frame towering. "Fear is not your enemy." "It is," Evelyn said, her hands tightening on the rims of her chair. "It's treating me like a problem to be solved instead of a person to be met." She gestured to the folder. "There's a child in there. Did your due diligence mention he sings off-key and saves birthday candles like he's guarding heaven's gate?" Edward's mouth thinned, pain flickering in his eyes. "I lost your mother," he said, the words a leak from a dam he'd sealed for years. "I will not lose you." "You're losing me," Evelyn said, not unkindly. "One decision at a time." He moved to the window, a man approaching an altar for the wrong reasons, the city below affirming his control. "I sent a letter," he said, his voice a confession laced with pride. "To a client of his. I suggested they reconsider." Evelyn felt the floor tilt, though her chair stayed steady. "You heard his work." "I protected you," Edward said, his certainty that of a general commanding a war. She shook her head, slow and resolute. "No, you punished a stranger because you're terrified of my heart." His eyes sparked, a storm brewing. "Your heart has been unreliable." "It's beating now," she said, her voice a steady sea. "For the first time in years, it's beating for more than survival." Edward stepped closer, his voice low, dangerous. "He will use you." Evelyn's gaze was unflinching, her voice calm as the tide after a gale. "I am not made of glass. I am made of bone. Bone breaks in men stronger." They stood in a silence that had waited 4 years to speak, heavy with unspoken truths. Edward lifted a hand, stopping short of touching her. "You are my only child," he said, his voice cracking. "I cannot." "If you continue this," he said, resolve hardening his eyes, "I will remove the temptation. He will have no clients to court. He will learn to leave you alone." Evelyn thought of Ethan's dinosaur sticker in her wallet, slightly crooked but fiercely sure. She thought of Liam's bridge over a winter creek, his words, "Staying takes work." Something inside her, long held in check, shifted. You don't build a bridge by flooding the river, Dad, she said. You drown both banks. Edward's face was the one he wore at investor calls, unyielding. I'm calling this mercy, he said, because I stop before it becomes cruelty. Evelyn's eyes stung, not with tears but with a clarity that cut like truth. You intend to control, she said, because you don't know how to love. He flinched, a small crack in a towering man. Do what you must, she said, turning her chair, but not in my name. At the door, Edward's voice softened, almost to himself. You used to trust me. No, Evelyn said, not cruel, not angry. I was afraid of not trusting you. She left him with his skyline, the city's lights a cold testament to his power. In the hallway, she pulled out her phone. Liam's name absent, but the workshop's number scrawled on a card she traced with her thumb. Her finger hovered, but she didn't call. Not yet. A crack had appeared in her foundation, and cracks weren't fixed by pretending. You studied them, listened, decided what to sand, what to patch, what to leave as part of the shape. Behind her, in a room of silent hinges, a father planned an ultimatum. Ahead, in a shop smelling of cedar and stubborn hope, a man recalculated deadlines and told a 6-year-old the sky hadn't fallen. It had only practiced. The storm was changing names, and Evelyn knew storms did their truest work on what wasn't anchored to something real. The next morning, Liam was in the workshop by 7, coffee gone cold on the bench, the planer half-tuned. Simon Holt's voice came through the phone. Clipped, final. We're withdrawing. Too much uncertainty. I sent every document you asked for, Liam said, his voice calm but unyielding. Simon sighed, the sound heavy with corporate regret. I'm not saying it's you, Liam, but we can't have our flagship counter tangled in rumors. It's easier to pick another builder than fight smoke. Liam swallowed the retort burning in his chest. Understood, he said, but you'll get the counter you deserve. The line went dead, the silence heavier than the cedar beams stacked against the wall. Ethan padded in from the kitchen corner, now a play space, his eyes sharp for his age. Bad call? Liam forced a smile, thin but steady. Just someone deciding they don't want what we make. Ethan frowned, his small hands clutching a crayon. Then we make something better. For someone else. Liam ruffled his hair, his heart aching but resolute. That's the spirit. But inside, he knew it wasn't that simple. Across Bayview Town, Evelyn sat in Edward's study, its dark paneled walls and first-edition shelves a fortress of intimidation. Edward stood by the window, hands clasped like a general issuing orders. You've been spending time with this carpenter, he said, not a question but a judgment. I have, Evelyn said, matching his tone. Not his posture, her chair a quiet defiance. He's beneath you, Edward said, his voice cold steel. Not in worth as a human being. Yes, in worth as a human being, Evelyn cut in, her words sharp as a chisel. That's exactly what you mean when you start with, not in worth as a human being. Edward turned, his eyes glinting. He will cost you more than you can afford. Your name, your dignity, your safety. My name is mine. My dignity is mine, she said quietly, her voice a steady tide. He stepped closer, his shadow looming. I've already ensured his biggest contract fell through. If you don't cut ties, I will finish the job. No clients, no orders. I will make it impossible for him to work in this city. Evelyn's breath caught, a storm surging in her chest. You'd ruin a man's life because you're afraid of my choices? I'd ruin a man's life, Edward said evenly, to save yours. She leaned back, her chair a steady anchor. This isn't saving. This is caging, and I've spent enough time behind your bars. Edward's jaw tightened. You're not thinking clearly. No, she said, eyes locked on his. I'm thinking for myself. That night, Evelyn typed a message, her fingers trembling over the screen. Liam, I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry. Her chest ached, her thumb hovered, and she pressed send. The words a weight she couldn't carry but couldn't keep. Liam read it twice, then a third time. The workshop's quiet, swallowing him whole. Ethan, coloring at the table, looked up. Who's it from? Liam slipped the phone into his pocket, his voice steady but hollow. Someone who won't be coming by anymore. Ethan's eyes sharpened. Too wise for six. Miss Evelyn? Liam didn't answer, but the silence was enough. She smiled different when she saw us, Ethan said, his voice small, aching. Real smiles. You don't get many of those. Liam squeezed his son's shoulder, his own pain held still. Sometimes people have to go. It's not always because of you. Ethan frowned, his crayon pausing. Then why does it feel like it is? Liam had no answer that wouldn't hurt more. Come on, he said softly. Let's clean up. The workshop hummed with the soft whir of tools and the scratch of pencils on wood, but a quieter shadow hung over Carver & Son Woodworks. Ethan, usually a spark of questions and laughter, moved with a hesitance that seemed to wait for permission, his small voice muted by an unspoken wait. On the fourth day, he stood in the doorway, jacket zipped, hair jutting at odd angles like a storm-tossed sea. Can we go see her? He asked, his eyes bright with hope. Liam didn't look up from the plank he was sanding, his hands steady but his heart heavy. She asked us not to. She didn't ask me, Ethan said, his voice firm with a child's unyielding logic. And maybe she's waiting for us to try. Liam set the sander down, the silence between them a bridge half built. Why? Because, Ethan said, his words a small, fierce vow. You taught me family doesn't leave just because it's easier, and she feels like family. Liam closed his eyes for a moment, the boy's truth cutting through his resolve like a chisel through soft wood. Get in the truck, he said, his voice steady but trembling with possibility. The Langley estate rose from the fog like a relic from another century, its iron gates and manicured hedges guarding a world of cold precision. The driveway stretched like a runway, vast and unyielding. Liam pulled over near the entrance, and Ethan slipped out, his boots crunching on gravel as he pressed his face between the bars. Miss Evelyn, he called, his voice a beacon piercing the cold air. We miss you. Please come back. Liam stood behind him, one hand on Ethan's shoulder, his eyes scanning the mansion's windows for a sign of life. Inside, Evelyn froze, her pencil hovering over sketches of designs she'd never build. Ethan's words floated up, raw and unpolished, impossible to ignore, tugging at a heart she'd thought locked tight. Sophie, the housekeeper, appeared in the doorway, her voice soft as a prayer. Mija. Evelyn's hands tightened on her chair's wheels, her heart pounding with a choice she hadn't dared name. I need to go, she said, her voice steady but trembling. Sophie nodded, opening the back door with a quiet grace. Be happy, she whispered, a blessing carried on the wind. Evelyn rolled out into the chill, down the service path, through the gate's smaller door. Ethan ran to her, his arms wrapping around her without hesitation, his voice muffled against her coat. I told Daddy you loved us. I knew I was right. Liam stood still, his eyes searching hers, a carpenter measuring the grain of a moment. What are you doing here? I'm choosing, Evelyn said, her voice simple but resolute, a tide turning toward shore. For the first time in 4 years, I'm choosing. I choose you. I choose Ethan. I choose us. Liam's exhale was a sound caught between a laugh and a prayer, rough with hope. Your father, let him try, she said, her eyes fierce. I've already lost the use of my legs. I won't lose my heart, too. Then let's go, Liam said, before the gate closes again. As they moved toward the truck, Evelyn felt lighter than she had in years. Not because the fight was over, but because she'd chosen her side. Behind them the mansion loomed, its windows reflecting a gray sky. But ahead lay an open road, and in the truck's cab, a warmth that felt like home. For the first time, Evelyn believed that warmth could be kept, if you were willing to fight for it. The message had been 12 words long, a door slamming shut. Liam, I can't see you anymore. Please don't contact me. I'm sorry. Liam had read it once at the workbench, the phone lying flat as if distance could soften its sting. Then a third time, his thumb hovering over a reply that refused to form without sounding like a plea. In the corner, Ethan's stegosaurus wore a crown of orange crayon, a small king in a quiet kingdom. Is that from Miss Evelyn? Ethan asked, not looking up from his drawing. Liam slid the phone into his pocket, its weight sharp as a blade. We won't see her for a while, he said, his voice careful even. She asked for space. Ethan's crayon paused mid-spike, his face crumpling. Did we do something wrong? Liam pulled a stool close, sitting eye to eye with his son. Sometimes grown-ups fight storms you can't see, he said, his voice a steady anchor. It's not about you. It's not even about me. Ethan stared at his drawing, his small hands trembling. He pressed too hard, and the crayon snapped, the sound sharp in the quiet shop. I don't like storms, he muttered. Me neither, Liam said, pulling him into a hug, heavy and sure, holding his own pain still, while Ethan learned the shape of his. At the penthouse, Evelyn set her phone face down, the silence pressing in like a tide. Sophie knocked once, entering with a tray. Tea, toast, lemon marmalade that tried too hard to taste like sunshine. You look like you swallowed a key, Sophie said, setting the tray on the low table, and the door's still locked. Evelyn tried for a smile, fragile and fleeting. I made a decision. Sophie poured the tea, letting it steep like a thought unhurried. Or a decision was made for you, and you typed it. You sound like Clara, Evelyn said, a spark of warmth breaking through at the name, a reminder of the cafe's steady harbor. Smart women often agree, Sophie said, her smile soft but knowing. Drink. You'll think better standing on your ground. She winced at her own words, a reflex, and added, It's okay. I miss saying it too, Evelyn murmured, her voice catching. Sophie's hand found her shoulder, a pressure that said, You are not fragile. You are held. Sometimes love takes a detour, Sophie said softly, but detours show you the good trees. Evelyn looked out at Crescent Bay, its glass-like surface a mirror for her thoughts. This doesn't feel like a detour. It feels like a detainment. Sophie didn't argue, adding an extra spoon of lemon to the tea and leaving without preaching, her silence a lesson in itself. Across the penthouse, Edward Langley's voice droned through a conference call. Words like acquisition and synergy rearranging the air like furniture. He didn't knock when he finished, standing in Evelyn's doorway to announce a victory no one sought. It's done, he said, his voice cold as steel. His largest contract is gone, the smaller ones too. He'll turn away on his own. Evelyn's hands tightened on her mug, the ceramic burning courage into her palms. You didn't stop at mercy then, she said. You liked how it felt. Edward's face didn't move. I did what needed doing. No, she said, her voice steady as a tide. You did what you know how to do. He left, muttering about a 4 p.m. call with Zurich, and the room grew vast, heavy with absence. Evelyn took a slow breath and opened her notebook, writing one line. Water doesn't judge the shape of you. The words sat like a candle, burning quietly. At the workshop, the day busied itself to outrun pain. Liam sharpened chisels that didn't need it, stacked offcuts by color, inventoried screws as if order could mend a fractured heart. Clara let herself in at noon, a paper bag in hand promising more than sandwiches. House call, she said, setting out roast beef, a mason jar of pickled carrots, and oatmeal cookies sturdy enough to halt a storm of tears. Eat or I'll feed you like a bird, and you'll never live it down. Liam took the sandwich, his voice low. She texted, he said, knowing Clara had already read the weight in his shoulders. Clara made a sound, not pity, but sharp, cutting through. He nodded, the gesture clean but heavy. Sharp can be sterile, she said, but it still hurts. Ethan peeked around the drill press. Miss Clara? Yes, Captain, she replied, her smile warm. Why do people say goodbye if they don't want to? Clara leaned on the workbench, her voice steady as a bar at closing. Sometimes they're trying to keep someone safe. From what? Ethan asked, his eyes wide with a child's need to understand. From a person who forgot how to love without owning, Clara said, her gaze kind but clear. From a storm in a suit. Ethan considered this, then wandered back to his drawing. A minute later, the paper tore, his cheeks flushing with a fury he couldn't name. He ripped it into jagged halves, marching to the trash, but at the last moment kept one piece, the rocket candle he'd drawn for Evelyn, and folded it into his pocket. Liam watched, his hand lifting to his mouth. Fatherhood, a quiet art of holding pain still while his son learned its shape. Tuesday, he'll ask to go, Clara said quietly. Don't make him wait a week. I promised her, Liam said, his voice steady but aching. We'd honor the ask. Clara's mouth softened, then pressed thin. You can honor the ask and still show up at the gate. You can honor the ask and still show up at the gate, Clara Benson said, her voice a steady beacon in the sawdust-scented air of Carver and Son Woodworks. Ethan needs to learn that love doesn't hide just because it's told to stand in the corner. Liam Carver's jaw tightened, his hands pausing over a plank. He also needs to learn we don't force doors. There's a line I don't want to teach him to cross. Teach him to stand, Clara said, her eyes kind but unyielding. Pushers break things. Standers hold them together. That evening, Sophie found Evelyn Harper in the library, the lights off, the room bathed in moonlit quiet. Your father's asking if you'll join dinner, Sophie said, her voice soft but firm, a woman who'd helped raise Evelyn and knew when neutrality wasn't enough. You don't have to say yes to everything you don't want. Evelyn smiled in the dark, a fragile spark. Funny, that's what the storm told me. Sophie pursed her lips, her gaze warm but sharp. Storms are blunt. I prefer polite weather. She hesitated at the threshold, then added gently. They were at the gate this afternoon, the boy and his father. Evelyn's body stilled, her heart a tide caught mid-surge. Who? The boy, Sophie said, her voice a quiet anchor. He called for you like his voice could change a city's mind. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her chair's armrest, her breath shallow. Why didn't you fetch me? I didn't want a war on the driveway, Sophie said, stepping closer, her eyes soft with understanding. You weren't ready. Thank you, Evelyn whispered, the words trembling with both I'm not ready and I want to be. Sophie nodded and left, the room falling back into its moon-quiet hush. Evelyn stared at the window, the glass no longer a mirror but a canvas of night. Her hands lay open in her lap, small boats waiting for names. She pulled her phone from her sweater pocket, typing 2 words she wouldn't send. I'm sorry. She deleted them, tried wait for me, and deleted those too. Finally, she slid the phone away, choosing silence, because some bridges are built before they're crossed, when courage remembers how. On Wednesday, the workshop felt unsteady, like a table with one leg too short. Liam pulled the maple slab meant for a grand counter and began shaping it into 4 smaller tables, his hands wielding stubbornness and surrender as equal tools. Ethan, wielding a rubber mallet, tapped glue-ups with fierce precision, declaring, I'm assisting gravity. Around 3, the door chimed, and Oliver Reed stepped in, his suit an odd contrast to the sawdust but worn with quiet respect. He removed his glasses, cleaning them with the caution of a man choosing words like chisels. Mr. Carver, he said, I'm Oliver. I represent Langley Enterprises. Liam wiped his hands, his gaze steady. You're the weather pattern. I'm one of its cloud, Oliver said, a wry smile breaking through. Also a human being, which complicates employment. Liam let out a breath through his nose, sharp but not unkind. Here to deliver more fog? I'm here to speak off the record, Oliver said, his voice clear, human, not a letterhead. He glanced at Ethan, whose wide eyes held courtroom gravity. May we talk where he doesn't have to hear? No, Liam said, his tone firm. He hears what happens to us. We don't hide storms. Oliver nodded, respect flickering in his eyes. Your shop was targeted, he said plainly, not because you did anything wrong, but because someone thinks control and love are the same thing. Liam's mouth twitched. They're not. I know, Oliver said. I told him that and kept my job by writing letters I don't let my mother read. He'll escalate. Call it protection. I'm telling you so you can brace without breaking. Liam leaned on the bench, his hands steady but his heart heavy. Why tell me at all? Because I have to sleep, Oliver said, his voice raw, and because your son is learning how men behave from the men he sees. He handed Liam a plain card with his personal number. If you need a translator or a witness. He looked at Ethan. For the record, young man, fog lifts. Ethan considered him, his eyes bright with curiosity. Do you like dinosaurs? I like that they tried, Oliver said, his mouth quirking, even when the sky got weird. After he left, Ethan turned to Liam. Was he a good guy? Liam watched the door ease shut, the bell's chime fading. He's trying, he said. Trying counts. That night, Evelyn placed Ethan's bag of wood shavings on her desk, opening it to release a warm, resinous scent. Trees and sunlight saved for later. She closed her eyes, the workshop vivid in her mind. Screws in jars like constellations, a bridge over a winter creek, a hand that didn't flinch. She set the dinosaur sticker beside the bag, its crooked edges fiercely sure, a small emblem of hope. The intercom buzzed, Edward Langley's voice crisp, asking if she'd weigh in on a philanthropy gala theme. Evelyn pressed the button, her voice steady. No, Dad, not tonight. Tomorrow then, he said, sharp and expectant. Tomorrow maybe, she replied, smiling because maybe was the stubborn cousin of yes. She wheeled to the window, practicing her old swimmer's breath. In for 3, hold for 1, out for 3, not fighting the water, letting it hold her. Across Bayview Town, Ethan folded the torn half of his rocket candle drawing, tucking it under his pillow, its flame a permanent promise. She'll come back, he whispered into the quilt, deciding he'd help the sky remember. Tuesday wasn't far, but Ethan, with the fierce impatience of 6, was learning love shows up, even when told not to knock. Dad, he called into the small apartment, can we go somewhere tomorrow? Liam appeared in the doorway, rubbing his neck where the day's weight lingered. Where? To that big fence, Ethan said, eyes bright and brave. I want to tell it we're not scared. Liam looked at him, seeing ancient courage in a small body, and nodded. We won't push, he said. We'll stand. Standing's stronger than pushing, Ethan declared. That's right, Liam said, his voice a quiet vow. It holds the world together. Outside, the wind shifted, a line of fog loosening its grip on Crescent Bay. The city didn't notice, but in 2 rooms, one high and guarded, one small and honest, people did. The story, forced to whisper, was finding its voice for the next chapter. The iron gates of the Langley estate stood tall and deliberate, each bar forged to outlast storms, each lock older than the boy before them. Ethan pressed his palms against the cold metal, tilting his head back as if measuring a giant. Liam stood a few paces behind, hands in his worn jacket, his heart a steady plank across an uncertain tide. She's in there, Ethan said, not a question, but a certainty. Maybe, Liam replied, or maybe she's out. Either way, we don't bang on gates we didn't build. I'm not gonna bang, Ethan said, his voice resolute. I'm just gonna call. Liam opened his mouth to speak of respect, of avoiding a scene, but Ethan had already cupped his hands and shouted, Evelyn! The name soared over the driveway, piercing the manicured silence. A bird startled somewhere, and Liam closed his eyes, letting the sound be, raw, hopeful, unpolished. No response came from the windows or the grand double doors. Ethan tried again, louder. It's me! We're not scared of the fence. Liam half laughed, despite himself. Not exactly subtle, buddy. It's not supposed to be, Ethan said, his voice softening. She might think we forgot. Before Liam could reply, the smaller gate clicked open. Clara stepped out, hair tucked under a beanie, a heavy canvas tote in hand. Well, she said, taking them in, this is a picture I'll keep. Clara, Liam greeted, nodding. We're just standing. Yeah, I got the memo, she said, her smile wry. Standing's underrated. She looked at Ethan. You've grown since I last saw you. I'm trying, Ethan said, his seriousness almost comical. Do you know if she's home? Clara's eyes softened. She is, but her world's crowded right now. Some of it's her choice, some isn't. Can you tell her we came? Ethan asked, his voice small but fierce. Clara hesitated. I can, but if she knows you're here and doesn't come down, it might hurt worse than waiting. Liam caught Ethan's glance. We can take that chance, he said quietly. Before Clara could respond, Sophie's voice cut in. Is there a problem? She stepped into view, her frame straight as the gate, her eyes scanning Liam, Ethan, then Clara. Mr. Langley wouldn't like... Clara invited me to speak, Ethan interrupted, words tumbling over themselves. I'm not here for him. I'm here for Evelyn. Sophie's expression shifted, a flicker of warmth breaking through. Evelyn's occupied, she said, and the last thing she needs is pressure. I'm not pressure, Ethan said, his hands tightening on the bars. I'm a reminder. The words landed like a plank across a river. Clara's faint smile held a rare truth. Sophie studied Ethan, then looked at Liam. You understand being here might make things harder for her. Maybe, Liam said, meeting her gaze. But it's harder to think you were left behind. A long silence stretched, then Sophie exhaled. I'll tell her, she said, but no promises. That's all we ask, Liam replied. Sophie vanished down the service path. Clara leaned against the fence. You two are the first to stand here without demanding something from that family. We're not here to take, Liam said. Exactly, Clara said, her smile wry. That's why it matters. They waited, 5 minutes, then 10. Ethan's eyes stayed fixed on the mansion, a shadow crossing an upstairs window, too quick to read. Sophie returned alone, handing Ethan a paper sparrow folded from cream stationery. She's not ready, she said to Liam, but she asked me to give him this. Ethan's fingers closed around the sparrow, holding it like a living thing. Kay, he said, his voice tight but steady. That's more than most get from those wall, Sophie said. Liam nodded. Thank you. As they turned to leave, Ethan glanced back. Can you tell her one thing? What's that? Sophie asked. That I'm still standing, Ethan said, his voice a small, fierce vow. Sophie's lips curved, a barely there smile. I will. The walk to the truck was quiet, Liam letting the silence breathe. At the cab, Ethan spoke. She didn't come, but she sent something. Sometimes, Liam said, starting the engine. That's her way of coming. Ethan unfolded the sparrow, revealing Evelyn's handwriting. Hold fast, I'm trying. He smiled, crooked but sure. See, she's still in there. Liam's throat tightened. Yeah, he said. She is. They drove off, the iron gate fading in the mirror, but not in Ethan's heart. The sparrow sat in his lap, its wings bent but unbroken, carrying a weight no bird should bear, and still refusing to fall. Upstairs, behind a half-drawn curtain, Evelyn watched the truck vanish, her hand warm from folding the sparrow, Ethan's voice echoing sharp and certain. Sophie closed the door gently. They stood, she said simply. Evelyn's eyes lingered on the empty road. Then so will I, she whispered, the wind beyond the estate shifting, adding another plank to a bridge still unfinished. The day dawned pretending to be ordinary, a lie it couldn't sustain. At Beacon Haven, Clara wiped the chalkboard clean, scrawling tomato basil, courage optional with a flourish. Gulls bickered over the harbor, and in the workshop, Liam planed a maple edge until wood curled in perfect ribbons, the air thick with the scent of promises kept. At noon the bell chimed, not a customer, but Evelyn rolling in, hair wine-tossed, cheeks bright with a fear that looked like resolve. The paper sparrow, frayed from Ethan's pocket, rode in her lap, its wings bearing the weight of love that had done some living. Ethan sprinted from the back. You came, he cried, his voice a burst of sunlight. Evelyn laughed, unsteady but honest. I said I'd try. She looked at Liam, her eyes fierce with decision. I'm done trying. I'm choosing. The room held its breath. Liam set the plane down, his voice soft but steady. Say it out loud, so the room remembers. Evelyn swallowed, her heart a tide breaking free. I choose us, she said, the words no longer a theory but a vow. I choose your kitchen table government. I choose Tuesday soup, the smell of sanded maple, and the way Ethan tells the truth like it's a sport. Evelyn Harper said, her voice a steady tide breaking free in the quiet of Carver & Son Woodworks. I choose you, Liam. Ethan whooped, a burst of sunlight in the sawdust-filled air, his joy a spark that lit the room. Liam's mouth quirked, his eyes glistening with unshed tears, a carpenter's heart laid bare. Then we'll build from that, he said, his voice low, resolute. That's a good beam. The bell over the door chimed again, not with the storm's wild cadence, but with a weight that stilled the air. Edward Langley stepped in, winter clinging to his coat, followed by Oliver Reed, his face unreadable, hands tucked in a suit that seemed to shrink from taking up too much space. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The workshop's raw honesty felt too bright for a man whose life was polished to a sheen. Edward's gaze swept the room. The tools, the half-finished projects, Ethan standing like a small sentry, Evelyn in her chair, her spine a testament to resolve. His eyes fixed on her, sharp as a scalpel. "You should have told me you were coming here." "I did," Evelyn said, her voice calm but unyielding. "I told you with silence. It was the only language you didn't twist into fear." Edward stepped closer, ignoring Liam, his presence a shadow seeking control. "We'll talk at home." "No," Evelyn said, her words a quiet rebellion. "We'll talk where truths don't echo." Liam stood unmoving, his presence a beam that held without needing to flex. He didn't square his shoulders, he didn't need to. He simply existed, steady as maple, preventing collapse. Edward finally turned to him, folding Liam's name into something small. "Mr. Carver, I tried to spare you the humiliation of mistaking fantasy for reality. You refused the favor." Liam's voice was level, a perfectly set shelf. "Reality is a boy who needs breakfast, a shop that builds things that don't lie, and a woman who isn't furniture." He nodded toward Evelyn. "She belongs where she's seen." Edward's eyes flashed, a storm brewing. "She belongs where she's safe." "Safety without dignity is a pretty prison," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through like a tide reclaiming shore. "I've served that sentence." Oliver cleared his throat, stepping into the tension, Edward's jaw tightening at the unpermitted interruption. He removed his glasses, rubbed them, and replaced them with deliberate care. "Mr. Langley," he said, addressing Edward but speaking for the room, "you hired me to craft words that comfort investors. Today I'll try something new. The human parts." He turned to Evelyn, his voice softening. "He's afraid. It doesn't excuse what he's done. It explains the angle." Edward's mouth thinned, his tone icy. "Explain what you were hired to do last week, since we're indulging candor." Oliver nodded as if the order freed him from secrecy's weight. "I drafted letters," he said, "to clients Mr. Carver hadn't lost. I suggested smoke from a fire I knew wasn't there." Clara Benson, who'd slipped in and now leaned in the doorway like a verdict, let out a low whistle. "Fog with a letterhead," she said. "Classy." Oliver pressed on, undeterred. "I also shredded a memo you never saw," he said to Edward. "A draft to authorize a private investigator to plant an anonymous OSHA complaint. I refused. You didn't notice, because men like me are useful when we quietly choose which sins would damn you." Edward's face held steady, unyielding. "And now you grandstand to win a room I already own." "Atom." "You don't own this room," Clara said, her words no metaphor but a truth carved in wood. "You can buy coffee at Beacon Haven, but that's as far as your money goes." Ethan edged closer to Evelyn, his small frame a shield. He looked up at Edward, his voice clear with a child's unlearned bravery. "You make her cry," he said. "That's not what daddies do." Edward flinched, as if Ethan's small hand had found the one seam in his armor. He looked at Evelyn, truly looked, and saw perhaps for the first time in 4 years, a woman who breathed without his permission. "Evelyn," he said, his voice softer, finding a new register, "he will break you." She shook her head, her gaze steady. "I was broken, Dad. Then I learned to build again. Not by you, but by soup, by sawdust, by a boy who saves candles like their faith itself." Edward's eyes shifted to Liam. "If you cared for her, you'd step aside. Let her return to the life she was meant for." Mum. Liam rubbed a scar at the base of his thumb, his voice calm but unyielding. "The life she's meant for is the one she chooses. If she chooses away from me, I'll walk her to the door and stand there till she's safe. If she chooses this, I'll stand as long as it takes. That's what care looks like where I'm from." Oliver exhaled, a sound of relief, as if Liam had found the words he'd sought in a dictionary that didn't carry hope. Edward stared, his voice bitter, amused. "This is your legal counsel, Evelyn? A poet in a suit?" "I'm her witness," Oliver said gently. "We all need one when we turn the map and follow where our hearts point." Silence settled, the wind outside teasing the eaves, the creek behind the shop murmuring its steady work. Evelyn wheeled forward, close enough to see the stubble Edward missed shaving, her voice quiet but resonant. "Dad, I loved you when you were busy, and I love you now that you're scared. Those aren't mutually exclusive, but I won't trade my life for your comfort anymore." She touched the paper sparrow in her lap, then met his eyes. "This is my choice, not against you, for me." Edward's shoulders dropped, the weight he'd mistaken for strength falling away, leaving him painfully human, a father facing a truth he'd dodged. "I don't know how," he said, a confession from a pulpit he'd never claim, "to be your father without fixing you." "Start by staying," Evelyn said. "Fixing is furniture. Staying is family." The words landed, the tools themselves seeming to lean in. Edward glanced at Liam, then Ethan, who met his gaze without hatred, impossibly without fear. A door cracked open behind Edward's eyes, stubbornness softening. "If you choose him," he said, his voice trembling, "I won't burn his house to keep you warm. I'll try to learn how to stand." It wasn't an apology, nor absolution, just the first plank laid across a river enough to start a bridge. Clara sniffed, breaking the solemnity with purpose. "Good," she said briskly, "because I've got a back room full of chairs needing someone to fix them without giving them a complex. I'll pay in soup." Ethan tugged Edward's coat, the billionaire looking down as if seeing a small hand for the first time. "Do you know how to make paper sparrows?" Ethan asked, his curiosity sincere. Edward blinked, caught off guard. "No, I can teach you," Ethan said, his voice serious, "but you can't rush the folds." Edward's mouth softened, a gesture unpracticed but real. "I can try." Evelyn's breath hitched, Liam's hand hovering near hers, close enough for warmth to travel. Oliver cleared his throat, his tone almost cheerful. "If we're building a new standing order, I suggest provisions. 1, emails aren't weapons. 2, soup is legal tender. 3, Tuesday is sacred." "Add a clause," Liam said, his smile wry. "Bridges have right of way." "Seconded," Clara said, rolling up her sleeves. All eyes turned to Edward, who gave the smallest nod. "Carried," he said quietly. In the shop's hum, a new sound emerged. Not the whine of a blade or the ping of a nail, but the quiet pulse of a family conceding its own possibility. Liam lifted the maple plank meant for a lost contract, placing it on sawhorses at the room's heart. "Words are a start," he said, "but people cross on wood." Edward stepped to the plank's other side, his hands testing its pulse. "What are we building?" "A small bridge," Liam said. "There's a creek out back that's been waiting." Oliver shed his jacket, Clara rolled up her sleeves, Ethan gripped his mallet. Evelyn watched them gather, a quiet she hadn't known she thirsted for settling in her chest. "My choice," she said aloud, to the room, to herself, to the day that dared to pretend it was ordinary. "My bridge." If Edward heard my family in the space between her words, he didn't argue. He reached for the plank, for once not needing to hold it alone. The next morning the sky glowed pale gold, the color of forgiveness after a storm. The creek behind the workshop ran high, chattering against rocks with uncontained joy. Liam was outside, sleeves rolled, sorting planks salvaged from a shuttered boatyard, his hands moving with the patience of a man who knew bridges weren't built in haste. Evelyn rolled across the damp grass, the creek's song guiding her. She paused, watching him measure twice before marking a cut. "You've been up since dawn," she said, her voice soft but warm. Liam glanced over his shoulder, his smile a quiet spark. "Bridges don't build themselves." Edward's voice came from behind, rougher than usual. "Neither do fathers." Evelyn turned. He stood in a wool coat, collar up, hair touched by the wind. Beside him, Ethan carried a box of nails almost too big for his small frame, and Oliver, in boots unaccustomed to mud, looked out of place but resolute. Liam straightened, wiping his hands on a rag. "Morning," he said, his tone neutral but open. Edward stepped closer to the plank on the sawhorses. "You meant it yesterday," he said quietly. "I don't say things I can't put my hands to," Liam replied. A pause hung between them, fragile as a new-cut board. teetering toward fracture or mending. Ethan broke it, his voice a child's unfiltered truth. "Grandpa," he said matter-of-factly, "you can hold the hammer, but I get to swing it." "Grandpa," Ethan said, his voice matter-of-fact, a child's truth cutting through the morning's quiet. "You can hold the hammer, but I get to swing it." Edward Langley blinked, the title landing like an unexpected plank across a river. "Grandpa," Ethan shrugged, his small shoulders carrying the weight of obvious logic. "You're her dad. She's with us, so you're kind of stuck with me." Something unguarded flickered in Edward's eyes, a crack in the fortress he'd built. He nodded once, a single word falling softly. "Deal." Liam handed Edward a length of sandpaper, his voice steady as a well-placed nail. "First rule, you smooth the edges before anyone steps on it. A sharp edge cuts more than wood." Edward took it, running his palm along the maple's grain, the texture grounding him. "You speak like my father did," he murmured, his tone caught between memory and surprise. "That's either a compliment or a warning," Liam said, and the corner of Edward's mouth twitched, a rare hint of warmth breaking through. Oliver Reed, standing to the side, clapped his hands together, his suit in odd contrast to the damp grass. "All right, legal counsel reporting for duty. I've reviewed the site. No OSHA complaints, no letters to draft. Let's build something worth keeping." Clara Benson arrived, balancing a tray of steaming mugs, her presence a warm tide in the morning chill. "Soup's not ready yet, but coffee is," she said, her eyes gleaming with purpose. "You lot look like you're fixing more than wood today." They worked side by side in the clearing by the creek, the air alive with the scent of pine and purpose. Liam measured and cut with a craftsman's precision. Edward sanded, his hands learning the rhythm of humility. Ethan drove nails with careful taps, his focus fierce. Oliver held beams steady, his boots muddy but his spirit resolute. Evelyn sat nearby, her notebook open, sketching the bridge as it took shape, each line a testament to a family forged, not by blood, but by choice. The work was slow, deliberate, but it carried a rhythm, an unspoken agreement woven through each exchanged tool and glance. At one point, Edward looked at Evelyn, his hands pausing on the plank. "I spent half my life thinking strength was keeping people out of the storm," he said, his voice rough with realization. "And now?" Evelyn asked, her gaze steady, a quiet challenge. He smoothed the wood, his words measured like a man learning a new trade. "Now I think strength is crossing into the storm with them." Evelyn's throat tightened, a warmth blooming in her chest. "Then you're learning the right trade." By midday, the bridge's frame stretched over the creek's narrowest bend, its lines strong but unpolished, a testament to patience. Liam stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. "It'll hold," he said, his voice steady as the wood beneath. "Not just for today, for a long time." Edward ran his hand along the rail, his touch tentative. "It's not perfect," he admitted. "No bridge ever is," Liam replied, "but it does the job. It gets people across." They stood together at the edge, the creek's murmur a quiet hymn below. Ethan, impatient to test their work, turned to Evelyn, his eyes bright with purpose. "Come on," he urged. "First crossing's yours." Evelyn hesitated, the creek's rush stirring an old fear, of falling, of being unsupported. But Liam's hand was there, steady on her chair's wheel, and Edward stood on her other side, his hand hovering, not holding but ready. She rolled forward, the wood firm beneath her, a promise kept. Halfway across, she stopped, gazing at the water's dance, its surface reflecting them all. Different heights, different histories, one shared space. "This," she said softly, her voice a tide breaking free, "is what staying looks like." Edward looked at the water, then back at her, his eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "And this is what choosing feels like," Clara called from the bank, her voice cutting through the moment's weight. "All right, enough symbolism for one day. Lunch is ready." Laughter rose, mingling with the creek's current, and for the first time Edward didn't stand apart. He stepped fully onto the bridge, pausing to look back at the span they'd built together. "Not bad," he said quietly. "Not bad at all." Liam met his eyes, his smile wry but warm. "It's a start." Edward nodded, and in that moment there was no Langley fortune, no Carver stubbornness, just two men agreeing, without words, that some things were worth holding up together. As they walked back toward the shop, Ethan skipped ahead, Oliver and Clara in easy conversation behind. Evelyn felt the air shift, lighter, as if the bridge outside had taken root within them all. The day that began with wood and nails ended with soup and shared silence, the kind that needed no fixing, the creek singing their laughter downstream like a vow. The harbor woke in the first blush of morning, Crescent Bay catching the sunrise's gold like a mirror crafted for this day. Fishing boats bobbed gently, and the old wooden pier, restored by Liam's careful hands, stretched toward the lighthouse that had guarded Bayview town for over a century. Evelyn sat at the pier's edge, her ivory dress, simple, sleeveless, elegant in its honesty, fluttering in the breeze. She'd chosen it because it felt like her, not a version staged for photographs. Soft footsteps approached, and Liam paused behind her, his navy suit crisp but unpretentious, holding not flowers but an old carpenter's pencil, sharpened and worn. "Not the usual wedding gift," Evelyn said, smiling over her shoulder. Liam held it out, his voice warm. "The first pencil I used on the bridge. Thought you might want it in case you forget how we got here." She took it, her fingers closing around it like a vow. "I couldn't forget if I tried." From the lighthouse steps, Ethan waved, practically vibrating in his small suit, his hair untamed. Oliver stood beside him, grinning broadly in a pressed blazer. Clara arranged wild daisies and pale roses tied with rope, her movements steady as the tide. Edward adjusted his tie, his hands betraying a nervousness foreign to him, his eyes never leaving his daughter. The guest list was small by design, no ballrooms, no chandeliers, just those who'd crossed storms together. As they gathered in the lighthouse's circle of light, Oliver cleared his throat. "Before we begin, Liam, Evelyn, anything to say to each other?" Liam turned to her, his voice steady but warm, rising above the tide's gentle rush. "I thought love came like a wave, knocking you over. But you've taught me it's the kind that stays. Quiet, constant, like the tide. You don't need to check if it's still there." Evelyn's eyes glistened, the morning sun catching tears before they fell. "And you've taught me strength isn't standing alone," she said. "It's knowing when to let someone stand beside you and trusting they'll stay when the storms return." Edward cleared his throat, and all eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, his voice wavering. "I thought my job was to shield my daughter from everything, but the best thing I could do was ensure she had someone worth facing the world with." He looked at Liam. "You've proved you're that someone. For that, I'm grateful." It was the closest to a blessing he'd ever given. Liam inclined his head, a quiet acknowledgement. Ethan tugged Oliver's sleeve, whispering. Oliver chuckled, addressing the group. "Our ring bearer has something to say." Ethan stepped forward, a tiny ring box in hand, his voice clear with a child's truth. "When you build a bridge, you start on both sides. If you only start on one, you never meet in the middle." He looked at Evelyn and Liam. "You guys started on both." Evelyn's laugh trembled, soft and full. Liam crouched, meeting Ethan's gaze. "Guess that makes you our best little engineer." The vows were simple, unadorned. No grand promises, just truth. "I choose you," Liam said, "on easy days and hard ones." "I choose you," Evelyn echoed, "in sunlight and rain, in every tide between." When Oliver pronounced them married, there was no roar of applause, only a deep, collective breath, as if all knew they'd witnessed something rare. They walked toward the pier's end, the harbor opening before them, the lighthouse standing sentinel, a reminder that even in darkness, there's a point of return. Liam leaned down, his voice a murmur for her alone. "Ready for the first crossing as Mrs. Carver?" She smiled, her heart full. "Lead the way." Hand in hand, they stepped onto the bridge spanning the creek's mouth, built plank by plank with their family. Halfway across, Evelyn stopped, the water rushing below, sunlight dancing on its surface. It was the same view as the day they'd finished, but it felt different now, alive with promise. Edward caught up, Clara at his side, Ethan running ahead, Oliver snapping a single photograph. "This bridge," Evelyn said softly. It's not just wood and nails. It's proof people can change, that love can be chosen, that we can meet in the middle. Liam squeezed her hand. And stay there. The walk was slow, unhurried, each step a moment too precious to rush. At the far bank, the harbor bells rang noon, their sound rolling clear and bright over the water. The group lingered, reluctant to break the spell. Finally, Edward spoke, his voice lighter than ever before. Let's get home. We've got soup to finish and a deck to sand. Ethan grinned. And maybe a new bridge to start. Evelyn looked at Liam, her smile certain, unwavering. We've got time. They turned toward the lighthouse, the bridge behind them, the open water ahead. Under a wide, forgiving sky, the family they'd built, not by blood alone but by choice, walked forward together. Some bridges aren't just crossed, they're lived on every single day. And sometimes the strongest bridges are made not of wood or steel, but of love, forgiveness, and the courage to begin again.